Right, guys, thank you for returning to watch the part B of the Shrigleytube TV on Tuesday night. I'm desperate to get this on for 7 o'clock, so it's about 4 now. I want to get uploading. I could possibly get this running tonight, but I have failed for the video. So I've done loads of whiftering about oil pressure and cranks and God knows what else for you to watch in case you're interested. And I will get it running, and I will obviously put that on Sunday night's video. But for tonight, there's somehow I've made it up to an hour of whittering. So yeah, have a look at it if you want, and all about the Vauxhall XE video. And I will see you on Sunday night. Oh, and at the end, there's a little bit of silliness with just messing about with Bergerac and his little car that he's been out, and he had a little crash and popped his tyre. So we did a little bit on that, but just a bit of jokey stuff, bit of lightheartedness. Right, I'll speak to you Sunday night. Thank you. Bye-bye. Right, just on with building the XE. As you can see, it's now got its pistons, rods and cranking. There's not a lot to talk about there. Obviously, I put the, it's on the steel rods. So I don't know if you can actually see them through the window there. Standard crank, standard rod length, and that nice little Omega piston. These are the bearings that are fitted in it. I like these. These are really good, these. ACL V series. I also like the ACL Duroglide, but I particularly like these. These are a good bearing. So all that's together, plastic gauged up fine, turns over lovely. I've just been doing my piston heights, so I've been rocking the piston to get it level, and I'm roughly about 8 and I think maybe 9 is it on this side. Shape yourself, Andrew. 15, so it's rocked ever just like that. I did work it out to be about 12 our side, 13, 12 there. So looking at the way the engine goes together, we need to run a 51 thou head gasket, which will give us at least about 35 thou of clearance between the squish part here and the head. You could run it a little bit closer, but in the interests of survival, we'll give it a little bit of space. And also, I'm not a massive some people absolutely rave about squish and how close you can get the head to the piston at top dead center, but for me, I've never seen absolutely fantastic results from getting the squish really close. It just makes a mess of it all if the piston hits the head, and yeah, makes a mess. Anyway, I'm waffling shit. Right, okay, we're just on with the XE. As you can see, I've done a bit more to it. We did the core plugs last week. I've got the dry sump pan on with the dry sump pump. Pistons and rods are in. Everything measured up good. Piston height's nice, about 10 thou per hour. So going to get my gasket chosen now. I have bought one already, but this is a 60 thou gasket, and I'm going to go for one a little bit thinner so we can get the compression up as high as possible for this engine. So I'll organise that for Monday. Now, I just thought, subjects I've not touched on before, obviously lots of you guys will fully understand it, but I thought we'll go through why we use a dry sump system on a rally car or a circuit car or whatever. So there's a few advantages I want to talk about. Now, for those of you that are just like basic engine people and don't understand the ins and outs of it, normally the way an oil system works is the oil is high pressure fed through the crankshaft and to the head and then through the cams, and then it all drips down via gravity to the sump pan, where we have a big sump on the bottom that collects the oil, and then we have a pickup pipe, and the pickup pipe picks the oil up, and generally we have the oil pump in the nose of the crank. They're called like I think they call them a serpentine or a nose-driven pump. Not serpentine, that's the wrong word. Anyway, the oil pump drives off the nose, and it pressurizes the oil after it's picked it up from the sump, and then squeezes it through the engine, through the oil galleries again. But on a dry sump system, what we do is we have an external pump. This is a Pace 3-stage pump, and basically what happens is we have 3 stages in it. So we have 2 scavenge and 1 pressure. So if we look underneath here, you'll see we've got 2 pipes that go to each end of the sump, like that. And what they do is they hoover the oil out. So as soon as the oil comes out of the crank journals and out, down from the head, from the camshaft journals, etc., this hoovers the oil out at high speed, and it sends it via this -12 fitting to a tank. And that tank, it then has like little aerators and a bit of design inside it where the oil settles, and then the oil is fed back to the feed side of the pump. So the return from the sump and the feed back to the pump is all on dash 12. And then from there, it comes out of here. This is the pressure section. So these two are scavenge. This is the pressure section, and you can tell that because it's got the pressure relief valve, which is adjustable on the end. So this is the pressure side of the pump, and this is what creates the pressure to send the oil back to the engine. So from here, it'll go to like a remote oil filter housing. And then from the remote oil filter housing, it comes, or it can probably go for a cooler as well and be cooled. And then it goes back into the engine to recirculate, so it lubricates the engine again. So it goes in there into the main gallery, which is there. I've just put the pung back in it, so it comes up at an angle like that. It goes across, and the other end of the bung is there. So that does all the mains gallery, and then it comes up here, and this one goes to the head and lubricates all the followers and the camshafts, etc. Now, it seems like a load of palaver, doesn't it, having a dry sump system, but there's some distinct advantages. One of the basic ones is you can get the engine much lower in the car, because if you look, the sump isn't deep because it's scavenged out and sucked out of the sump, this shallow pan. You can get the engine lower in the car and get a lower centre of gravity. Another really good advantage is if you've not got oil inside the sump floating round, it doesn't get caught up in the crankshaft, so you get less windage. I had it explained to me by someone who's into the windage job, and he said, and I struggled to believe it, because you'd think a crankshaft going round at like 8,000 RPM, the oil would fly out the journals, and then we put these like finger baffles in the engine to catch the oil and separate it off into the sump. But what actually happens is, because the crankshaft webs are going so fast, they create a depression behind them as they're going round. And it's like, if you've ever seen like the storm chasers, you look at the way all the pianos and the doors and everything get sucked into the vortex of the whirlwind, or whatever you want to call it. It's the same in the crankshaft. The oil hugs the crankshaft and goes round, and then absorbs energy, because obviously it's getting smashed up by the webs on the crank. So by running the dry sump system, we save on power, because we've got less windage. And if you run a vacuum as well, so if you can imagine these two sections of the pump are running really fast. They've only got one pipe that goes to the tank, by the way, because there's a little port inside that joins this first stage to this second stage. So these two both scavenge together out of that one single -10 pipe. So what I'm trying to say is, yeah, advantages are engine can be lower, we get less windage. Now, we've got these two pumps running at, third crankshaft speed or whatever. We can run a vacuum as well in the crankcase. So if you bung all the breathers, we do our breathing from the tank, you can run a vacuum, and then that also aids the power, because there's less air and oil in the sump to get caught up in the crankshaft. So there's two good advantages. And of course, the main advantage, really, why I think people do it, is because by putting the oil in a tank, if you've got a car that's on slicks and you've got lots of G-forces, because the tank is always sort of half full of the oil, and that's where the reservoir of oil is, the pump never runs dry. And, I do a lot of wet sump engines, and what I say is, when you do a dry sump engine and you refresh it, the bearings are always a lot nicer in the dry sump engine, because as long as that belt doesn't fall off, the engine's got a constant supply of nice, fresh, cool oil to keep it lubricated. And with the wet sump system, even with the best baffle plates and all the rest of it, you can often end up with a situation where you can get the oil flying around that much that the pickup pipe will pick up a bit of oil and air, and you get a bit of cavitation in the pump, and it won't necessarily throw the oil light on, or throw the, because it's squashing air and oil, so we've still got pressure there. But when you've got the dry sump tank, we know the tank is going to be always half full, and it feeds from the bottom, obviously, into the feed side of the pump, so we've always got that nice flow of oil. So I've gone on a bit longer than I wanted to. That was the three main reasons I can think of the dry sump. Obviously, there's going to be another reason that I forgot about, which someone will no doubt mention in the comments. But for me, obviously, less windage, lower centre of gravity, and a good steady supply of oil. That's what we're looking for on keeping a race engine fit and healthy. Right, sorry, I have thought of another thing that is better with a dry sump system, because obviously you'd think with these 3 stages there's a lot of power being sat there, but because this is a modern design pump, one advantage it's got over a conventional oil pump in a, say, like an original Vauxhall engine, is the pressure relief valve system. So on a standard oil pump on the end of the crank, because it runs at crankshaft speed, we often attain oil pressure, maximum oil pressure, by, I'll say, 2000 RPM, so 50 psi. We call it a relief valve, a blow-off valve. At 50 psi, the pressure is enough to lubricate the bearings, so any excess is blown off and it returns into the sump via a little port in the bottom of the oil pump. And so you've got, if you imagine you've got a relief valve plunger, which is a piston with a spring behind it, just dead simple, a bit like a wastegate on a turbo. As soon as the system sees 50 psi of pressure, the relief valve blows off and the oil is directed back to the sump to be picked up by the pickup pipe and sent back around. So on most engines that have got this system, you've got a situation where a lot of the oil after 2000 RPM is getting dumped into the sump to be picked up and sent back again. But where this is clever is the people that designed this pump, what they did was, you've got your feed here from the tank, so we've got a -12 feed and that's your outlet. And this, imagine, forget this part of the pump, imagine this is just one single rotor on its own, which it is, obviously it's not part of that. What we have is we have a plunger, and then when the pressure gets up to 50 psi or whatever we've set the plunger at, instead of the oil being directed back into the sump or back to the tank, it's fed in a circle back to the feed side of the pump. So the pump only ever takes what it needs to create the pressure it's required for, set by the plunger. Quite a nice, neat, clever design. I like that. Obviously the advantages are we're not bleeding the oil back into the sump or the dry sump pan to be then picked up, taken back to the tank and back in a circle. So it only takes what it needs. So it's another little point there to do with the dry sump. Okay, chaps, following on from the oil pressure chat we just had about the dry sump system, I've just showed the video to a friend of mine who knows nothing about engines, and he said loads of things that I didn't even take into account, like what is oil pressure, why do we need oil pressure. So I thought, right, I'll do another video to conclude this little chat, and I will talk about why we have oil pressure. Now obviously we all know that oil pumps the oil, we can get that much. I've made a little diagram, looks like my Dougie's drawn it, but I'll come to that in a minute. Now what happens is the bearings, say like the bearings require oil all the time. So this is the bearing surface in the big end, and this is the main. The main has an oil channel in it. I'll come to that in a second. So this runs at like 2.5 thou clearance, just 2.5 thousandths of an inch. It's like, I don't know, it's like a cat's whisker, a tiny bit of clearance, and you can see how it runs on the journal there, and the cap. So when it's all torqued up, the clearance is very, very small, and the reason, that's what gives us the pressure, because the oil can't get past, you see. So the oil that's fed into the engine is through the castings, etc., and then these are the main bearings. So these are the bearings that don't go up and down, they just sit and support the crankshaft. And these are really important, these main bearings, because they are what deliver the oil into the crankshaft. So if you look at this hole here from a main where it's delivered to, it's drilled across and comes out here. So if you look down that hole there, I don't really get the angle quite right, you would see light. So basically that is cross drilled from there to there. So the job of this number one main bearing is to deliver oil to the big end there, and the job of this main bearing, because this is a free bearing crank, is to, it's Siamese off there, it delivers oil to bearings 2 and 3, and the main bearing number 3 delivers to number 4. So what you'll see is there's a channel. So if we look at the hole, it's in the middle. So as the oil comes out of the hole from the casting, from the engine block, from the oil pump, it circulates around there and goes into the crankshaft. At the same time, a percentage of it will leak past this 2.5 thou clearance here, or we'll say 2 to 3 thou, because that's the general sort of clearance we work with. Right, so we all get that oil supplied to the main, and the purpose of the main is to carry the oil to the big end. So the big end's a different cookie. That looks like this because that's the end stop. That's where the oil can't go any further. So it has to squeeze out through this clearance, and that's where we'll come to my absolutely amazing technical drawing that I've done here. So this is a crank pin. So if we're looking end on here, that's the wedge there, and there's the pin. So you can see the oil comes in that groove we just talked about here, yeah, and it follows the main bearing pin round. And then what it does is, this is the cross drill and this is the hole. It's slightly different to this crankshaft, but we imagine it's what we call a cross drilled crank. So rather than just having one feed that went up like that, and the crank we just looked at here, this is like a racing crankshaft. So it's got a cross drill. So it's cross drilled that way, and then it feeds up to the main, it's up to the big end. And again, we've got this 2.5 thou clearance. Now, what happens is the oil can't go past there, so this is called a delivery pressure. The actual pressure within the crank pin itself is massive, and that's called a hydrodynamic wedge. So even this is exaggerated, obviously, because 2.5 thou is absolutely nothing as a clearance. So it looks like in actual fact in a real drawing you wouldn't even be able to see it, but I've done it so you can see the wedge, and this is the point. So depending on where the load's coming from, the pin will always try and contact at some point of the bearing. And the idea is with a white metal bearing like this is that the contact point on the bearing to the crank is always protected by what they call this hydrodynamic wedge. And that this wedge, they reckon, I mean, from what I've read, it's like 5,000 psi. That's why your oil quality is so important, because if the oil gets too hot or breaks down, and that lubrication point breaks down, then we get contact between the big end pin and the bearing surface, and then the bearing will start to delaminate or fail or overheat. Now, interestingly, clearances on a lot of modern stuff like this XE that I'm doing now, we're looking at like 2 thou clearance, because we're going to run like a 540s or 1040s oil. But when I take a lot of the old stuff apart, they used to polish the cranks down to give them a big clearance, so they're up on 3.5 thou clearance, but they used to run a thicker oil, either like the Vauxhall 2050 or the Castrol R40, that type of oil, where the oil was thicker. And the idea was, from what I can understand, if you're going to run a bigger clearance, you can get more oil to pass through. Now that might sound like not the ideal thing, but the idea is that because there's so much pressure here, we get a lot of heat build up. So the bigger the clearance, the more oil you can get through. And when the oil passes through the bearing, it takes the heat with it. So it's all about temperature control. Because if you think about it, you're oiling your engine on a race engine when they're up at 8,000-9,000 RPM, the oil temperature is critical and really hard to control. And it doesn't come from surface area contact in the block. It purely comes from this hydrodynamic wedge. It comes from the bearing speed, the differential speed between the crank surface and the bearing surface, and that's where it all comes from. So yeah, a lot of the older engines ran a thicker oil with a bigger clearance, and now the modern engines, we run a thin oil with a tiny clearance. And obviously the smaller the clearance, the narrower the wedge, and I'm not 100% how that affects the efficiency of it all, but from what I can see, the modern oils, the Millers that I love using, it's really good, especially once it gets to 100 degrees. If you run them on the dyno and have an oil temperature gauge on the oil going into the engine, once the oil gets to 100 degrees, the oil pack starts to work properly. I don't know how it works, but it's some sort of posh lubricant, and you really do see the power start coming on. Like, you can gain 5 horsepower from having a decent oil. Anyway, I'm not going to go too much. I can't believe that's 6 minutes of waffle I've done. I hope you've got a better understanding now of why we've got a high pressure oil feed system to the crankshaft. Okay chaps, I'm on with the XE again, and I promise I'm not going to mention anything to do with oil pressure. That bit's over. Now, I just thought I'd do a little video about port matching, because this lovely cylinder head that's been provided, all the work done, which is great. It's got all nice bronze guides and 3-angle seats and 1 plus big valves and etc. Wants a bit of a faceplate, but we're gonna shim this up next together, which should be interesting. Now, what I wanted to talk about here was, when I've come to, these are the direct to head throttle bodies that the chaps bought for it. Very nice. So it eliminates the inlet manifold, but I've obviously not been on this head before, I've just noticed there's a step. So basically the inlet port is smaller than the throttle body. So as the air goes down, it'd be like hitting a step, a shoulder all the way on the outside. So what I like to do to get a witness mark so that I can hurdy-gurdy it out is I just put some engineering blue on the face of the inlet manifold, or actually it's like a manifold body, and then I put some masking tape on the ports. So when I clamp them bolt down, I bought some new bolts. I've got some nice shiny M8 bolts here. I'll bolt these on, and then hopefully the witness mark will be transferred onto here. And then what I'll do is I'll get the engraver and I'll go around and engrave it so that when I remove the tape, I end up with a permanent engravement as to where the port wants to be. And then we can machine it back and it'll be a nice job. So I'll do that in a second. Okay, so we've just bolted the throttle bodies on and off again, and we can see we've got a nice witness mark where the engineering blue has sat. And then since then, what I've done is I've gone into the room where the engraver is, and it's just a vibration engraver with a very, very fine point. And I've just chased around the outside of the black line, the blue line. And hopefully when I pull this off now, it'll leave an engraved witness as to where I need to machine the port up to. Don't know if I'll be able to see it. We'll see in a second. Ah, good. Just about see it. So can you see the engraved line? It's not particularly accurate, but it gives me an indication of where the manifold sits and what I need to do to make it line up perfectly. So I'll take this now, and I use the high-speed carbide and some polishing tips to clean it all up so it all port matches, and we'll get it cleaned, valves, springs in it, valves, etc., and then we'll do a bit of a shimming together. Okay, back with the XE. I've just machined all the ports so that it matches the inlet now after we did the little marking out exercise, and I've given the head the final clean and a quick faceplate ready for assembly. And it does look a little bit scabby, and I did contemplate putting it in the aqua blaster machine, but even though we've got all the bungs out, you know, that do the oil waste, so we can in theory see right through these to the side, there's lots of what I can describe as ledges and undercuts where the casting's quite complicated, and the media from the blaster could hide there. And then ultimately I've seen so many wrecked engines through the media from aquablasting getting released into the oil system. It just destroys the crankshafts and the piston skirts, etc. So I thought, you know what, it doesn't really matter, it's going to be covered in dust after the first rally anyway. Let's just keep it safe, and just cleaned it with some TFR and a steam cleaner. So the purpose of this is I just looked at this and I thought, wow, what a lovely inlet run it's got. So this is the opened out inlet. So if I hold this now on full throttle, you can see what a absolutely fantastic path it is straight to the back of the valve. Brilliant, lovely design. Can't wait to get this in the dyno and wind it up and find out how many horsepower it's got. Okay, now some of you guys might remember back in the day when the Astra GTE and Astra GSI were current, they had a lot of problems with porosity in the head, where the high pressure oil way used to go porous between this point and this point, and then it basically push all of its oil into the header tank and the coolant system and then rot the pipes, etc. I remember loads of them. I did loads of them. We used to do head gaskets thinking it was head gasket at first, but it wasn't. It was the head porous. And then they it was mainly, as I remember, it was mainly the later engine that had the coil pack mount on the end. I think they call them the low noise engine before they went Ecotech. But anyway, this some clever chap decided to sell a sleeve that you buy. It's just an 8mm bit of tube. I've just made a little spigot on the lathe to knock it in with, and this is just 8mm tube, and the idea is you coat it in Loctite. It's not a retainer, it's like a thread sealant. What number is it? 932, and it's a high strength thread sealer basically. So don't try it with the green stuff, because if it gets stuck halfway, you're absolutely cream crackered. You can't do nothing about it. So hopefully now I'm going to try and do this on camera. Get the hammer ready. This should just slip in, and it goes all the way to the bottom of this first thread, last thread on here, and then it should come finished before the head bolt there, so the head bolt can still pass through the head. So here we go, live on camera. Is it going to work? Oh, it's gone sticky. Oh, it's going to have it. Bit more. Bit more. Right, so it's if you look in the hole there, you can see the oil way going up the top there, which goes to zoom out, goes to here, this one here. That's fine, that one's clear to there. And then if we look down here, we can see I'm not encroaching the hole where the head bolt goes. So we're winning. We'll call that success. Okay, just back on with this C20 XE head. It's Monday morning. I'm behind schedule. I've just put some bungs in. I've been putting the valves in. And I used to do the valves and the springs and the collets bobs, and I used to be able to fly through them, you know. I got into a real good rhythm. But since then, I think my eyes have deteriorated a bit because I can't see what's going on. So now I've got a torch to help me. And I thought we'll just do one together to try and, you know, show you how to do it in case... This is, or should I say, this is how I do it. It's not necessarily the correct way of doing it. It's just how I do it. So this is my valve spring compressor. And it's not like your normal sort of spring-loaded one. Or not spring-loaded, you know, the lever one with the different arms that compress the spring. This one's on a screw thread. So you can wind it in quite controlled, because it's when you unclamp it, if it goes too fast, sometimes it catches a collet and the whole lot goes pink. So I've compressed the spring right down. If I zoom in, you probably could see, if I got a torch in the right place, the cap is sat lower than the bottom groove in the valve. So what we're going to do is come back here. Now I'll just prep this because it's hard to do with one hand, but I use a bit of grease on a small screwdriver. I coat the collet in the groove so that when it lands in the valve it sticks. And I've also rubbed this screwdriver on a magnet, almost like magic, so that it will hopefully hold the collet in position whilst I zoom in and go into this hole, which I'm not very good at holding the camera and doing that at the same time. Okay, so there we are. Just got to drop him in there. Actually managed it. So once it's in the groove, push him round. I'm not very good at this, am I? And then push that back in there. Oh, because we've only got one access hole to get to this. So I'm dragging him round. The grease is holding him in position. There you go. I don't feel right now. Oh God. Oh. Right, that's all gone belly. Right. Well, I can't do it holding the camera, but I have honestly, I've not got a helper. I have managed to do the rest of them. So what we'll do is, I'm going to do that off camera now. It is quite easy. You just got to take your time and use the light, hold the torch, etc. Things to check for when building these XE heads, especially if it's on a single spring, which we aren't, is that the spring is sat in the spring seat uniformly at the bottom where it breaks the spring. And then we wipe all the grease off at the end and visually look at every spring cap and make sure that both collets are in the correct position. So I'll do that, and then we're going to get on with my favourite bit, which is shimming the job. Okay, I'm just on with shimming the XE head, and I thought I'd just touch on the camshafts and the way they work, and hydraulic followers. Now this is originally in a hydraulic head, they call it. It had hydraulic cam followers. So as a road car, it ran with a hydraulic follower, which was like, the idea is a maintenance free. As the valve seat recession or wears and the valve comes back up, the clearance is automatically set by the hydraulic follower. And without getting too keen on it all, the way it works is you can probably just about make out an oil feed in the whole cam follower bore. And what that does is, when the cam is off lift, there's a groove in the outside of the cam follower, and the oil goes into that groove, and there'll be a hole, and the oil goes into the cam follower, and it jacks up. And then when it hits, you know, took all the clearance up, obviously the pressure doesn't open the valve, but it keeps it hard against it, so there's no clearance. So the follower always runs against the camshaft. And then as the cam comes on lift, it's like a little ball with a spring, and as soon as it starts to try and squash the follower, it blocks the hole, so the oil can't escape. So then it does its lift, and then the whole cycle repeats. So if you ever got a hydraulic engine and you leave it stood for months, you come to it, the oil drains out of them, you might hear them tap when you first start it up. That's just the followers jacking up. Once they've got oil back in them, they're fine. Anyway, don't go into that too much. I hate hydraulic followers. I absolutely despise them. I wouldn't even build an engine with hydraulics again. I had a very bad experience once where I lost a lot of hours on a Rover V8, and it was all my own fault. I had the wrong oil in it, and I was dynoing it, and it was a pain. It had this misfire at about 5,000 RPM, and it looked like it was going lean, but it wasn't going lean. It was missing because the followers weren't jacking up. It was just the lambda read it as lean. So I spent hours and hours and hours, and eventually someone said to me, who was obviously far cleverer than me, went, "Oh, you can't run 2050 in a Rover V8. It's too thick. It makes the followers jack up. Try putting 1040s in it." So I put 1040s in it, and it was good as gold. So there you go. That's my experience of hydraulics. Never again. Bucket and shim. This has been converted to bucket and shim. Brilliant idea. Gives real good control of the cam follower and the spring and the valve, because it's like a direct acting. There's nothing going squishy. So it works by this shim, little hatted shim, and they sit on like a dick inside the end of the follower. So the other bonus of all this is it's half the weight of a hydraulic follower, because it's much simpler. So the way it works is the hydraulic cam's ground differently to a mechanical cam. So this cam has got something called a tappet ramp on it. So it has a clearance. It runs, we're going to run 10 thou on the exhaust, or 10 to 12 thou on the exhaust, and about 8 to 10 on the inlet. As a clearance in thousandths of an inch, so that's 0.2 or 0.3 of a millimetre for you metric guys. So what happens is, in the factory, when they design the cam, they design a tappet ramp into it, and that's where it comes off the base circle and starts to come on lift. It's designed into it there. Now, if the gap gets too big, they can become a bit noisy, but noise isn't really an issue with an engine that's a racer. We just want it to perform and do the horsepower, so we're not too concerned about that. I did have a bit of a lesson as well once. So I did an Alpha engine for someone, and they gave me the book to build it. It's an old Alpha 2 valve, like an Alfetta thing, and the book said that it had to have, I think it was like 35 thou of clearance. So I questioned it. I thought, it can't need 35 thou clearance, this on the, on the valve clearance. That's ridiculous. But that's how the cam was ground. It was designed to run with that lift. So I built it with the clearance it said, and I was thinking, this is going to be noisy as sin, this. Quiet as a mouse, because the cam was designed to run with that clearance. And it's all to do, the clearance is there just to combat expansion. We've got aluminium head growing one way, a valve which doesn't grow as much in theory because it's steel, etc. So we have that clearance. And the other thing I do like is, on a hydraulic cam, I think that a lot of them get wiped out because the cam follower is pushed hard against the cam all the time. It wipes the oil off. So you'll see in a lot of hydraulic cams, they actually have the oil feed from just before where it comes on lift on the cam. So it lubricates the cam follower, and the cam lube as it goes round is always there. Whereas on this engine, it's all on a bit of splash. But what will happen is the oil film will be all over the follower when it's on the base circle, when it's not on lift. So it's got a better chance of having some lubrication there when it does come on lift. These are quite a good design engine. They sit in you know, a nice well of oil here, but also, of course, because it's not a rocker engine with push rods and all the rest of it, it's got a decent sized follower, and it hasn't got a massive spring pressure, so the cam follower doesn't get a hard time, and the cams don't really get a hard time on these. So I've gone on again now. I didn't want to go on. I just wanted to say about hydraulics. Right. So what I do, there's all different ways of doing shims, but I find the simplest way is, what I do is I find a shim that gives me a clearance. Now, because this head's had the seats cut on a CNC, because it was done by Bob Jones, it was it'll have been done on his newer machine. So I know he'll have got every valve seat absolutely the same height, which I love that, because it means the shims will be dead easy. They'll be within 5 foot of one another. Right, so I'm put a cam in. Now on an XC, you can't do this on all engines, but on an XC, you can turn the cam, and it doesn't actually touch anywhere apart from, well, actually, it is catching somewhere. But anyway, I'll cross that bridge in a minute. What I was going to say is, if you look here, you'll see I've just set this now so that I can get a 7 valve feeler gauge in. And if you can't get a feeler gauge in, what I do is just get a magnet, and I can hear the bucket has space between the base circle of the cam and the valve top, and you always measure it with the valve, with the lobe directly opposing. So I know now that this shim is 120 thou, which is 3mm, yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make 7 more shims out of my little setup here, all the same height, and then it just eliminates taking the cam in and out of the engine a million times. Then we'll get a clearance off them all, and then I'll come back to you on how to do the next. Okay, back with shimming the head. So in the last video, we just did a bit where we put in a shim in that was a bit thinner than it needed to be, just so we get a clearance, so we get a measurement. And the reason I done that was this. So this is my little sheet that I have with all my inlet clearances and my exhaust clearances. And the idea of this is I just get a gap so I can get a measurement, and then we can tweak it from there. So this is my tolerance here. So ideal is 8 thou, but at this stage, before we've run on the dyno, I'm happy for a 7, 8 or 9. So 1 thou either side of the target is acceptable, because when we've run it on dyno, we'll check them again, because when you tilt the head down and run it, all sorts of things change. Only by a thou or 2, but it's just worth checking. And on the exhaust, our target is 10, so we'll have a 9 or 11, one either side. So all I've done here is, this is my clearance. I've got 6, a 6, an 11, a 16. My shims are a bit all over the show, to be fair. It's not the valve heights that I can see. So this is the shim I've removed from the engine, and the first number there that says 109 is the size that I measured it to be, the shim thickness that is, and it had 6 thou. And my target is 8 thou, so I want 2 thou thinner than 109. So I've written my target underneath, which is 107. And then same for the next one, that was a 114. Obviously I want it to be 2 thou thinner to give me 8 thou rather than 6 thou. So that I want it to be 112, so it's less tight, so it becomes an 8 thou clearance. And the same goes across. You can pick any one of them, it's dead easy. So we've got a 13 thou, so we've got a big clearance there, and we want it to be 10, so it's 3. So I want to be 3 thou thinner than 3 thou thicker, sorry, than 118, which is obviously 121, and that'll bring that down from being 113 to from 13 thou to 10 thou, because obviously it's 3 thou bigger shim. So that's what we've got, 118. That's the target, 121. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to look around here and look at what the targets are. So if I just pick on that one, the target for that is a 113, and that was a bad one to pick, wasn't it? I want one that's got a target of, what have we got plenty of? We've got a 120 there now. That one wants a target of 112, and no, I'm failing miserably. Anyway, the point is I can mix and match to find the best solution. So hopefully I won't have to go and grind up that many shims. I'll be able to make it work. And obviously some of them have come out spot on first time, or within a thou. So we just put a tick next to them and we don't bother disturbing them. Right, I'll get on with shimming this and we'll do some on the grinder. Okay guys, we're on the grinder. Just going to tidy this shim up. It's a 119, I want it to be a 113. So I put this little piece in, which I can't do one-handed, because that's just so I can measure it. If you look, it's like a little button. I just measure out 0 the vernier, because that goes inside the little hollow there, and we can measure it. Now, before I put it on the grinder, this is like a magnetic base. So what we do is we put them inside a washer, and it's really tight in this washer. It doesn't even want to go in. So what we do is we just give them a gentle bash till we hear it land, so we can see it's now flush. Because what happens is the surface area of the shim alone is not big enough to stop the shim from getting flicked out by the magnet. So we'll wind him in, and we'll just wind this up a little bit so we can go under and try and do this one-handed. What I'll do is I'll lower it down until we see a spark. Right, okay, so we've touched on there, so keep winding across. I'll try and zoom in a bit. You can see I'm just taking the top of the shim off and then edging across. Now I want, I think there's roughly about 6 thou off this. So I touched on there, I'll say that was 2. Let's wind, where's the thing here? Let's wind 4 on. Just go very slowly. And bring him back through. Okay, great. So what I'll try and do is I'll try and measure it whilst talking to you guys. Don't slide him off the magnet, which is hard. And then what we'll do is we'll put the camera here, and I'll get my little button, measure that, and we're down to 115, so I need another couple of thou off it and we'll be there. Okay chaps, I've put my ground shims in, and we're getting a bit closer. I've gone backwards here, got to 2 thou, don't know how I managed that. Must have got my numbers mixed up. 11, all top side, but that's fine because there'll only ever close up. 12, that's too big to start with, I'll have to bring it down 2. Obviously 9 and 11 we had before, they're all fine. So on the exhaust cam now, I thought it might be worth just mentioning, if you do attempt to do this job yourself, be a cast cam, they're quite brittle, so you can break them, especially when they've got like 450 thou lift like this thing. So what we need to look at is, whenever we take the cam out, we put it in what we call a safe position. Now you'll see here, this shoulder and this shoulder are very tight in the housing. If you just get a little screwdriver so you can see, if you look there and there, and that controls the thrust, the end float of the cam, so the cam can't float around. So if you undo the cam from this end, what happens is the angle makes it trap and it wrecks the head or can break the cam. So before we take the cam out, we always put these 2 lobes, this number cylinders 1 and 2, off lift. And then what we can do is, because it's only these 4 bolts holding the cam where the lobes are on lift, we can completely remove safely the front 2 caps, because there's no load on this end of the camshaft. And what that does is, if we just do it together quickly now, obviously there's little wavy washers go underneath these, but because I'm just shimming at the moment, I'm not using them. It's a bit naughty, but I'm not crawling them tight or anything, so not really. Anyway, whatever, waffling again. Right, so that looks a bit ropey, doesn't it? But the load is only between here and here. So now what we do is we just crack it off, gently, gently. And just keep doing little quarter turns like that. And what we should see is we'll start to see this front end of the camshaft coming up, because obviously the springs are pushing. I want this front end to come up first. So you see how it's started to lift now. It's got an air gap underneath it, so I know that the cam can't get trapped. So we just keep on doing these two caps. And there's no chance of ever breaking a camshaft if you follow this routine. Someone far cleverer than me told me about it, because I was trying to do all sorts of crazy things. But you'll see now the camera's gone loose. Just do these by hand, he says. So, still not gone loose. Bit too hairy this cam, bit too much lift on it. There you go. So it's all come apart and it's not trapped. And the cam just comes out nice and easy now. So there you go. Shoulders are nowhere near that end. Lift it out straight. And we can get on with sorting these pad clearances out. Right, that was a day of my life I won't get back. I've just finished shimming the head. So it's all ready to go on. Obviously the cams are slackened off so that they can't interfere with anything, and they're in a safe position. And we'll bring the pistons down from top dead. I've just put the dowels in the top of the block there, and also the restrictor for the head. It's also a one-way valve from when it was a hydraulic engine, obviously to stop the oil from draining back out the head overnight, and then the followers draining. So this is a second-hand head gasket, the keen-eyed ones amongst you would have spotted, and I'm just using this to get, I'm going to do a compression ratio check, because I've got a feeling, I think I've worked it all out before, and it was about 12 to 1. This is a 60 foul gasket, this was a 51, so we'll decide which gasket we're going to run. But just look, I mean, these aren't cams that I've ever seen like before. They're quite a lot of duration on them, and they're quite lifty as well. It's like 450. So in theory, because the cams are quite wild, we can probably run quite a high static compression ratio without running into any trouble, because dynamically it'd be quite low. So that's where we're at. I'll get this bolted on and we'll see what the compression ratio works at. Okay, I've just bolted the head on temporarily for a CC check. So we've got lift off both these valves, so they're shut. And if you look down the hole, you will see the fluid is just, I'll just bring it to and from past top dead center. It's just level with the bottom thread of the spark plug. So I have managed to get 45.6 cc's of fluid in the chamber. Now I prefer to do it this way. I do rough them out with the perspex and whatnot, but if you just literally put a little bit of grease on top of the block, bring the piston to top dead, wipe the excess off, that seals the top ring, and then we get an actual idea of the chamber size this way. So what did I just say that was? 45.6 cc. So we know it's 500, it's 2 litres, so it's 500 a pop, plus 45.6 equals that, divided by 45.6 equals 11.96 to 1, which is a touch on the high side for something with 86mm stroke. They'll quite high compression that, but because it's got these absolutely crazy wacky cams that the customers supplied, it looked like it wants to rev to like 8,500, but it won't be doing because it's on a standard crank. Yeah, what we'll do is we'll leave it at 12 to 1, that's fine, and we'll send this gasket back and get ourselves a 51,000 from Bob in the morning, and then we're sorted. Morning chaps, it's Tuesday morning. Today is the day we're going to run the engine. I just got back from Bob's this morning, been and got myself a new 51,000 gasket, so that's the same size gasket as we CC'd it with last night. Over here we've got new cam cover gasket, some more cold plugs for the head, a front seal, Water pump, what to talk about that? Really hard to get these now. If you're going to do an XC build, always try and get a pump with the steel impeller. I hate the plastic ones, they sometimes fall off. Got a genuine Gen V throttle pot, so that can go on his throttle bodies. And then I was just going to talk for 1 second about head bolts. Now, it might sound like a bit of a boring subject, but something worth noting is I absolutely hate it when I go in garages and I see people talking heads down and I hear them going as they talk the head down, because the bolt's jumping where the bolt, the shoulder of the bolt goes on the washer. Now, it's dead easy. When you lube them up, I'm sure 100%, well, 99% of you guys are already aware of this. Lube the thread, obviously, and then always lube under the shoulder there. As you can see, we've got a generous amount of our molly on there. Our slips like ARP lube this, it's just a bigger tin of it, basically. So, lube the head bolts up so that they all pull down and we get a proper measurement. Well, it's just 55 foot-pound and I think it's 90 degrees. It's a long time since I've done one, but I'll double check what the data sheet says. I've not gone for the ARP job. These are absolutely ample for the clamping force we require. This is a good engine to start with. They're really good at working. The head gaskets are strong on them, you know, the nice iron block that's very strong, and the head's not soft, so they don't suffer from the problems like some engines do. So I'm going to get all this put together, and then we'll next video hopefully be on dyno. Also got a dry sump belt there, got the right one now, so that's good. So we'll leave that off while we prime it, and then when it's primed up we'll flick it on and hopefully get a tune out of it. Make a little bit of a video on the cam timing, and also I'm so happy with this part that the customer asked me to buy. It's an SBD. It's like we'll call it a bridger sort of idler setup. As standard, these cars run with an idler that looks like this for the belt tension, and it's on a long M8 bolt with like a big spacer behind it. And every now and again, the bolt will fail and the belt will fall off. So somebody at SBD has obviously very cleverly designed this setup, and it's triangulated basically. So all these 3 M8 bolts are now supporting each other. This is all CNC machined aluminium, and it's all indexed, so it all locates. And the bit I really like about it, sad isn't it, look at them washers. They are not some 2p washer off eBay. They're a proper one-piece machined washer, which are a decent fitness and obviously a decent material as well. So I thought that was a really nice part of it that I'd put in. Now I'm just going to talk dead quickly about the cam timing. Obviously I've got the pistons at top dead center at the moment. We've got plugs in it and paper on the inlet because the engine is like what I like to call in a live state. So, you know, if anything floats around and in the workshop, a bit of a circlip or the old M6 nut or whatever, and it finds its way in the engine, we'll be in real trouble when it comes to fire up. So everything's sealed off. And what I was going to do first was I'll just set this to 0. If you look, it's just a little DTI gauge sat on the end of the bucket there, and I've tried to set it at the angle that the valve's running at, so we get a direct acting motion, so we can actually measure it properly. Now what I'm interested in is, you see it's off lift at the moment. This is the inlet cam, and I've been given some inlet figures to put the cam at TDC. So I've got a figure of 165 thou on the inlet and 145 on the exhaust. But before I set the cam timing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a full lift check. So I want to know at TDC at what point the inlet valve contacts the piston, so I know I've got clearance. I've got a minimum figure in my head of 250 thou. So let's wind the cam on now and see where we end up at. So that's 100 thou, that's 200 thou, that's 250, so that's well safe, and we've got like 297 there. So we've got loads of clearance at top dead center before the piston hits the valve, which is nice to see. So we'll go back to 0. Now what we'll do now is we'll wind it on to 165, so that's your 150, 65, and what I'll do is I'll put a little dot mark here so I know that's the cam's position. and then we'll go through the next bit when I've set the exhaust up. Okay guys, we're getting to the point where we're going to be doing our first revolution, and I thought we'd do it together. So all that's happened since last time I was on a minute ago was I've set the cam timing for the exhaust, and what I've done is I've just marked them. So we've gone 145 at top dead on the exhaust and 165 on the inlet. So I've got them blue marks as reference. I'm not too fussed about them being 5 thou either way at the moment, because we're going to run it, check the belt tension. When it's on the dyno, we can check the cam timing again, make sure it's exactly where I want it to be. Or if the engine's not doing what we want it to do, we might have to move it. So you can see the way it works is this is number 4 cylinder. The exhaust cam is, the inlet cam is just coming on lift because we're going clockwise, so going that way. And the exhaust is just coming off lift. So we've set everything up on number 4 cylinder there. And this is my TDC marker down here. So you can see at the moment, I've left the cam pulleys loose. So if I move the bottom pulley, you can see, if I zoom in, that the pulleys are moving independent to the camshaft, because I haven't tightened that 5mm, this ring of bolts around here. When these are tight, the whole lot becomes one. These are fantastic for setting up engines. It's just called a vernier pulley. Years ago we had offset dowels and things like that, and it was a bit more tricky, but all like the Hillman, we've got a multi-hole on the Hillman. But this is really easy. So I'm going to bring this round to TDC. There. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to nip up just one bolt, because I'm just doing a lap for the time being, and see if everything lines up when we come back. I've loosened the plugs so the compression can escape. So hopefully now this should all go round in a circle. Yeah, feels good. Bit hard one-handed, especially my left hand, but it's all good, that. So we're approaching TDC again now. What I'll do is we'll go back to TDC on here. Okay, and then we'll look in here for our blue marks. And yep, they're pretty much where I set them. So it's done a lap without having any issues. Belt's still nice and tight. So the belt tension on these is quite interesting. It's set by this water pump, which is on 3 big M8 bolts with washers, and it's eccentric. So as you spin the water pump, it puts the tension on the belt. But I'm just absolutely loving this. I'm going to buy one for, this is the next video we're going to do. Well, this is another 2-litre XE, but it's in a Z22 XE block. So it's taller and it's got a longer rod in it, which will be interesting to see how it performs. It's all steel, that one as well, so we can use some proper RPM on that one. But anyway, I'll get on with getting this in the dyno. Okay, chaps, I'll have to admit defeat. This isn't going to run today, and it's 4 o'clock now. I'm desperate to get the videos uploaded onto YouTube, which will take a couple of hours. So I'll just go through where I'm up to. I will get this in for Sunday night's video when it's running, etc. But yeah, it's just not going to happen. I'm not rushing it because I'll make a mistake then, and then rushing takes longer, as I'm sure you're aware. So where we're up to is, this is just like an aftermarket exhaust manifold, which conveniently came out in the right place for the silencer. Obviously I've got oil pressure up now. I've just wound the belt on its own wound the pump without the belt on. As we discussed earlier, this is a reservoir where the oil lives. Goes into the feed side of the pump. This is the pressure side. It comes out of the pressure side into the filter head, which is where it's filtered, and then it goes into the engine block to lubricate the block. Oozes out everywhere. You can see, you should be able to see oil in the I've wound it over basically on the pump so we got oil pressure. So the oil's up to the head, the cams have lubed everything, so it all drips down again then, and then gets scavenged by these 2 pipes here. That's Siamese inside, like we discussed before, into this -12 return, back to the top of the tank, ready for the reservoir to settle down so it can feed the feed side of the pump again. So all that's done. I'm on with the fuel side now, just sorting out all the pressure reg. It's like we're running it on 5 bar, so I've got to make sure it's all spot on, new pipe, because I don't want anything to leak, potentially cause a fire. So the last thing I was going to say was, I've just watched all the videos before that I've got to put on the XE engine, and one of the things that I noticed was I didn't talk about the crank balance. You might have noticed that the disc, let me just get the disc. The standard XE crank has this disc on the front of it, and this is for the crank trigger, and these sometimes can fracture between here and here just when they see a lot of RPM. So we've took that off now and put it on what we call an external trigger, so it's on the front pulley. But obviously I had to get the crankshaft rebalanced. So after this video now, I did make a video of it being balanced. Okay, thanks for watching. I'll see you on Sunday night. Don't say that. Oh, it looks pretty bullseye to me, that.
Okay.
Is that
You happy?
bullseye?
It's not perfect, but it's pretty near. 59 milligrams, that is.
Milligram. Well,
It's not a lot.
no. Bergerac's had a crash at weekend. We're going to go and wind him up. Bergerac!
Oh God, what?
Hey! Tell me.
A little sit down here. I'm trying to
You're,
rest.
I never catch you working. You're always sat down. Mate, I've heard there's been an altercation on the rally. What's happened? Oh, has the speed line gone?
Yeah, that's a Delta Turbo wheel though, so it's better really, isn't it?
A Delta Turbo. So, what happened, Bergerac? You,
Well, I just hit a little pothole, didn't I? About half a mile in. So, yeah, popped the tyre off the rim. You know,
Is that it?
happen.
is that it? I was hoping.
Completely event-free.
I was hoping it was going to be written off.
I know it's ugly, but yeah.
Dale said to me that you were doing 150 mile an hour down a back road, and a dinosaur jumped out, and you're supposed to avoid it, and it popped the tyre.
Yeah, well, you can believe who you like. You can believe who you like.
Right, what have you been eating here?
Just had my morning dregs.
Your morning.
Gingerbread man.
You must have some money, you. Right, that's it. I'm bored now.
Being used on a rally car, mate.
I know, but are you qualified?
Listen, I put-
These are
what?
magnesium rims.
Look, I put the protector on.
Mate, this is a magnesium wheel, this. I
Listen.
think Bergerac, he scratched your
It's only
wheel.
Bergerac's anyway.
He scratched your wheel. Right, have you had your haircut?
Yeah, I'm on a haircut.
I think you're 18 again.
Try to get rid of all the grey.
you have to bone it to do that, mate.
She's got his diet again.
Right,
Come on.
steady on, concentrate on what you're doing.
Right.
Right, all right.